That was the nightmare Isabel faced one late afternoon. Stopped by two local police officers for no reason other than the color of her skin and the expensive car she drove. But they didn't stop there. Their eyes scanned her with contempt, full of judgment, suspicion, and something more sinister. Then came the disgusting proposition: either pay us a little something, or you'll be in serious trouble. A blatant, shameless attempt at blackmail by two men entrusted with the duty to protect and serve. But Isabel, strong, principled, and fearless, refused flatly. And that's when everything spiraled out of control. Hell broke loose. The officers unleashed a torrent of vicious, racist, and sexist slurs. Without any legal justification, they yanked open her door, dragged her out of the car, and handcuffed her on the side of the road like a criminal. It was public, humiliating, and entirely illegal. But they didn't care. Their arrogance and prejudice made them feel invincible. What they didn't know was that they had just made a colossal mistake. They had no idea who they were dealing with. No clue about the power the black woman, now sitting silently, handcuffed in the back seat of their squad car, truly held. She didn't shout. She didn't resist. She didn't plead. She didn't need to. Because once her identity would be revealed at the station, the entire game would change. They would learn the truth, and it would hit like a thunderclap. They had just assaulted and illegally arrested the deputy director of the FBI. And when that reality landed, the same men who had spit venom just moments ago would tremble, scramble, and beg. What would they offer in desperation to save themselves? Would it be enough? And what punishment would come down on them when the Bureau found out what they had done? The answer would shake their world. This is a story of prejudice, unchecked authority, and a shocking reversal you have to hear to believe. The late afternoon sun painted the western sky in strokes of deep orange and soft amber, casting a golden glow over the quiet, affluent neighborhood. The long shadows of ancient oak trees stretched across the pavement, their branches waving gently in the warm breeze. Behind those trees, immaculate lawns framed luxurious homes, classic villas with pristine gardens and towering hedges. It was the kind of peaceful suburban scene that might grace the pages of a magazine. Gliding down the winding road, a black Mercedes S-Class moved smoothly along the pavement, its paint polished to a mirror finish. The vehicle exuded sophistication and quiet power. At the wheel sat Isabel Sterling, a composed black woman in her 40s, wearing a tailored business suit. Her expression was calm, thoughtful. She had just finished a long and intense meeting at the regional headquarters of the FBI, where she held the position of deputy director, a role that demanded intelligence, iron will, and steady leadership. Now, she was simply driving home, letting the soothing sound of classical music from the luxury Bose system ease her mind. But that brief sense of peace didn't last. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in her rearview mirror. A sharp chirp of a siren followed. Isabel's brow furrowed. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a light. She hadn't done anything wrong. She signaled carefully and pulled over to the side of the road, switched off the music, rolled her window down halfway, and waited calmly. A well-worn patrol car rolled to a stop behind her. Two officers stepped out. The first, Officer Ray George, was in his 50s, heavy-set, with the hardened face of a man who carried a permanent grudge against the world. His sharp eyes scanned the Mercedes, then narrowed on Isabel. A smirk appeared at the corners of his lips. Behind him was Officer Mark Jenkins, young, brash, impulsive, maybe in his early 30s. There was a reckless energy about him. George leaned slightly toward Jenkins and muttered under his breath, "Look at that, Mark. Black woman. Driving a car like that's something's fishy." Jenkins scoffed and nodded. "We might just get a little tip before shift ends." It was more than a sick joke. It was deep-rooted prejudice. The assumption that a black person in a nice car must have done something illegal to afford it. But they didn't belong here. And now, these officers felt entitled to exploit the situation. George stepped toward Isabel's window with a swagger in his step, ready to abuse his badge. Somewhat tense, Officer Jenkins stood a few steps back, his hand resting casually but purposefully on his gun belt. His eyes moved over the car with a probing gaze, as if he was trying to spot something out of place. "Good afternoon, ma'am," said Officer George, his voice attempting a professional tone, but betraying a clear lack of genuine respect. "You are going a bit too fast for this area." His words were vague, the accusation flimsy, clearly a fabricated excuse for the stop. Isabel turned to look him squarely in the eyes. Her tone was cool, composed. "Hello, officer. I believe I was driving well within the posted speed limit. Is there a specific issue?" She already knew the game they were playing. She hadn't been speeding, and she wasn't naive about what this was really about. George didn't flinch. He kept his cold, slightly mocking expression and replied curtly, "License and registration, please." Without a word, Isabel opened her purse and reached for the glove compartment. She retrieved her driver's license and the car's documents with deliberate care, handing them over calmly. Her eyes never left George's face. Years of high-pressure law enforcement experience had trained her to observe everything: tone, gesture, subtle shifts in demeanor. She watched him closely. George took the documents, glanced at the ID photo, then at Isabel again, his gaze lingering on her tailored suit, polished appearance, and the fine watch on her wrist. He flipped the registration card over a few times unnecessarily, as if trying to find fault where there was none. "Isabel Sterling," he said aloud, reading her name off the license. He peered into the car, eyes scanning the luxury dashboard and the leather interior. "Nice car. Must have cost a fortune." His tone shifted from cold professionalism to an intrusive curiosity. "What do you do for a living to afford something like this?" The question was inappropriate, irrelevant to the alleged traffic violation. Isabel felt irritation rising, but kept her tone steady and firm. "Officer, my profession has nothing to do with this stop. You mentioned speeding. May I know the exact speed your radar recorded?" George didn't answer. Instead, Jenkins circled to the rear of the vehicle, pretending to inspect the taillights, then slowly made his way to the front, peering exaggeratedly through the windshield. The act was transparent, meant to intimidate, to apply pressure. George, meanwhile, shrugged off the question. "Speeding's just part of it," he said, almost casually. "We also notice your windows might be a bit too tinted. That's another issue. And honestly," he added, letting his words hang with unspoken implications, "a car like this, driven by someone like you on this kind of road, at this hour, it looks suspicious. We've got reason to believe there might be something unusual going on." Isabel knew now that this wasn't about traffic laws. It was a performance, an abuse of power. "Officer," she said, her voice hardening just slightly, "my windows are within state compliance, and I'm on my way home from work. There is nothing unusual happening here. Unless you can present concrete evidence of a violation, I must insist you return my documents immediately." Her calm firmness seemed to rattle George. This wasn't going the way he expected. She wasn't intimidated, wasn't apologetic, wasn't giving him the satisfaction of fear. So he changed tactics. "Look, Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice lowering, trying now for a more conciliatory tone. He leaned in a little closer to her window, his posture suggesting camaraderie, but his eyes were calculating. "I can tell you're a reasonable person, but these things can get complicated. If we push this, we might have to impound your car, maybe even file a report. That means court, legal fees, a long process. You don't want that headache, right?" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Then, with a thin smile, he added, "It's a nice day. My partner and I are about to wrap up our shift. Maybe we can work something out. You help us a little, we help you. No paperwork, no fuss. Everyone walks away happy." It was clear. The bribe was on the table. Nothing happened. "You know what I mean?" George muttered, rubbing his thumb and index finger together. A crude, unmistakable gesture for money. Officer Jenkins stood a few steps away, pretending to inspect the car, but clearly listening, alert and waiting for the payoff. The sheer boldness of the blackmail attempt made Isabel's stomach twist in revulsion. She had witnessed corruption and misconduct countless times throughout her career, but to face it so personally, so directly, stirred a different kind of fury. Still, she didn't let it show. Instead, she looked George dead in the eye, her voice now edged with steel. Officer George, let me be perfectly clear. First, I have committed no crime. Second, I will not under any circumstances bribe a law enforcement officer. If you have legitimate cause to issue a citation, follow procedure, and do so. If not, return my license and registration, and let me continue my journey without further delay. She paused, letting her gaze pierce into him, calm but firm. And let me also warn you, your actions and language since this stop amount to abuse of authority, racial discrimination, and attempted extortion. I strongly suggest you consider your next move very carefully. The impact of her words was immediate, the cold clarity of her stance fearless, measured, and unwavering hit George like a slap to the face. His plan to squeeze quick money from an easy target had just disintegrated in front of him. And worse, he was now being dressed down by the very woman he thought he could intimidate. His pride boiled into rage. The pretense of professionalism snapped. "Oh, so you're stubborn now?" George growled, his voice cracking with fury. His face turned crimson, veins bulging at his temples. "Who the hell do you think you are, talking to me like that?" Then came the explosion of vile, furious spew of hatred. "You're just some black woman driving a stolen car, acting all high and mighty," he shouted, his voice thick with venom. He launched into a tirade of profanities, slurs that were both racist and sexist, each word dripping with rage and contempt. "You think flashing a little money makes you something special? A car like this? Please, you're either a damn hooker or a drug dealer. That's the only way someone like you gets to sit behind a wheel like this." Isabel's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she struggled to keep her rising anger in check. Every fiber in her body screamed for action, but she knew this was a volatile moment, one that could spiral even further out of control. Still, she would not cower. She would not give him the satisfaction. "You are behaving in a way completely unbefitting a police officer," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "You are abusing your authority and violating my civil rights. I demand to speak to your commanding officer immediately, and I want my attorney contacted now." That final demand broke whatever thread of control George had left. To him, it wasn't illegal, right? It was insubordination, an unforgivable act of defiance. He interpreted her call for legal counsel as a direct challenge to his power. "Call your lawyer? Talk to my commander? You think you have that right?" George laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. He turned to Jenkins, fury flashing in his eyes. "Arrest this woman," he barked. "Resisting law enforcement, disturbing public order, disobeying police commands. Search the damn car." The charges were bogus, fabricated on the spot, but George didn't care. He was determined to punish her, teach her a lesson. Jenkins, worked up and influenced by his partner's rage, didn't hesitate. In a swift, aggressive motion, he stepped forward and yanked open the door. "Open the driver's door. Get out. Now." Isabel knew better than to resist physically. Doing so would only escalate the situation and give them the justification they wanted. Calmly but firmly, she stepped out of the car, continuing to protest. "You have no legal right to arrest me. This is completely illegal." Her voice was steady, but the injustice was unbearable. Her words, however, were met with silence, indifference, and violence. Jenkins grabbed her arm and twisted it sharply behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder, and she gasped but didn't beg. She wouldn't give them that. The cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists tight, unforgiving. Jenkins squeezed them until the edges dug into her skin. Isabel clenched her jaw. George stood back, arms crossed, watching with a sneer of cruel satisfaction. "See," he muttered, "being difficult only gets you hurt." He kept throwing out insults, racial slurs, sexist remarks, each more vile than the last, aimed straight at Isabel's identity and dignity. Once the cuffs were secured, Jenkins pushed her roughly toward the nearby patrol car. He opened the door, shoved her head down, and forced her into the narrow back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing her inside. Isabel sat upright, hands bound, her eyes locked forward through the mesh divider. Her expression was a masked calm, cold, unreadable, but behind it burned a fury deeper than fire. She cataloged everything: the badge numbers, the patrol unit ID, the time, the words, the actions. Every detail. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. A storm was coming, and she would be the one commanding it. The patrol car sped away from the empty roadside, leaving her Mercedes behind in the golden light of dusk. As they drove toward the station, George and Jenkins kept up their taunts, joking and boasting as if they had just bagged a prize. They mocked her, laughed at her restraint, bragged about how they'd handle her at the station, too wrapped up in their delusion to realize who they were dealing with. They had no idea. The car pulled into the lot of the local police station, an aging two-story brick building nestled in a quiet part of town. Jenkins and George got out first, then yanked open the back door and pulled Isabel from the car with the same roughness, treating her as if she were armed and dangerous. She didn't resist. She didn't flinch. She just walked, upright and silent, flanked by two men drunk on false power. They led her through a musty hallway and into the check-in area. Behind the counter, Sergeant Miller, a grizzled man with steel-gray hair and thick glasses, was scribbling into a logbook. He looked up at the sound of footsteps. "What's this?" Miller asked, his tone flat, as if this were just another end-of-shift arrest. "Big fish, Sarge," George said smugly, pushing Isabel toward the counter. "Resisting disorderly conduct, suspicious behavior. You name it." He slapped her license and vehicle registration onto the desk with dramatic flair. Jenkins stood beside him, arms crossed, wearing a smug grin. Sergeant Miller adjusted his glasses, picked up the papers, and began entering the information into the system. He glanced at the woman standing before him, calm, composed, and eerily silent. Not the usual profile for someone brought in like this. He squinted at the name on the license, Isabel Sterling. Something about it tugged at the back of his mind. Still, procedure came first. He continued typing and looked up to ask a routine question. "Occupation?" The room went quiet. It was time. Isabel didn't blink. Her voice was even, sharp, and ice-cold. She stared directly at George and Jenkins, right into their eyes, and answered clearly, "Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation." A sudden, deathly silence descended over the room. Sergeant Miller froze in place, the pen slipping from his fingers and landing on the desk with a sharp, dry clatter. His mouth fell open, glasses slipping down his nose as he stared first at Isabel, then back at her again. His eyes widened in disbelief, his expression twisting into one of sheer horror. Deputy Director of the FBI?" he stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. He knew exactly what that title meant. One of the highest-ranking positions in federal law enforcement, second only to the director himself. In that moment, he fully grasped the catastrophe that had just struck his small-town station. But his reaction was mild compared to what happened next. George and Jenkins froze. The title hit them like a thunderclap. Their entire world imploded in an instant. The red flush of arrogance vanished from their faces, replaced by an ashen white that drained every ounce of color. Jenkins's smug grin cracked and crumbled. George's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, staring at Isabel as if she were not a woman, but a specter come to deliver divine judgment. Cold sweat poured down their necks, soaking their collars. They understood. Everything hit them at once. They hadn't just harassed a woman. They had handcuffed, insulted, extorted, and falsely arrested a senior official of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They had declared war on power far beyond their comprehension. George's knees buckled. He stumbled, and in the next moment, both men collapsed to the floor, landing on their knees in front of Isabel like broken marionettes. Their desperation filled the room like poison. Deputy Director Sterling," George croaked, tears mixing with sweat on his face. His voice trembled, cracking with fear. "Oh, God. No. We didn't know. We swear we didn't know. Please forgive us." Jenkins was worse. His head bowed to the floor, shoulders shaking as he sobbed uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. So sorry. 1,000, 10,000 times sorry. It was just a mistake. A stupid mistake. We didn't mean it. Please have mercy. I have a family." "Don't destroy us," their pitiful cries, the whimpering of once arrogant men now stripped of every illusion of control, echoed across the station. Officers nearby watched in stunned silence, unsure what to do, unable to believe what they were seeing. Isabel stood motionless, her hands still cuffed behind her, her gaze fixed on the two men kneeling before her. Her eyes were cold and clear, full of unflinching contempt. She said nothing to them. No anger, no forgiveness, just silence deafening, damning. Instead, she turned her head slightly to face Sergeant Miller. Her voice, calm yet charged with authority, shattered the stillness. "Sergeant, remove these cuffs, then call your commander. Immediately. Also notify the FBI City Field Office and request that agents be dispatched here. Now, is that clear?" Miller blinked rapidly, jolted back to life by her tone. "Why, yes, Deputy Director," he stammered, fumbling through his keys with trembling fingers. He finally found the right one and hurried to remove the cuffs. Isabel rubbed her wrists, eyes never leaving the room. Miller picked up the phone and dialed, panic rising in his voice as he relayed what had happened. To his superiors, to the Bureau, to anyone who could respond. The storm had only just begun. News that FBI Deputy Director Isabel Sterling had been illegally stopped, insulted, threatened, and arrested spread like wildfire. Not just through the department, but up the chain of command. It reached the police chief, the mayor, and senior federal authorities within minutes. One by one, the powerful came rushing into the quiet station, faces pale, voices urgent. The reckoning had arrived, and Isabel Sterling was no longer just a target. She was the storm. In record time, officials began arriving at the station, their faces tense, tight with shame, and filled with unmistakable fear. Agents from the local FBI field office, including the special agent in charge, were on the scene within minutes. They swiftly took control of the situation. Apologies were offered in abundance to Deputy Director Isabel Sterling. She accepted them with professionalism, but not warmth. Her focus was clear: justice, not comfort, not theatrics. Officers Ray George and Mark Jenkins were immediately suspended without pay. Their service weapons and badges were confiscated on the spot. They were placed in isolation pending investigation. Interrogations began almost immediately, conducted in parallel by the police department's Internal Affairs Division under the tight supervision of the FBI, with additional involvement from bureau agents specializing in civil rights and government corruption. Under the intense scrutiny and overwhelming evidence, both George and Jenkins broke quickly. They confessed to much of their wrongdoing, though each attempted to shift blame to the other or to the supposed pressures of the job. Their excuses rang hollow. A massive joint investigation followed. Every detail of the incident was dissected. Patrol car dashcam footage, radio logs, false reports, the stop itself, and Deputy Director Sterling's precise testimony. But it didn't stop there. The work records of both men were reviewed with a fine-toothed comb. The findings were damning. George had a long history of complaints involving intimidation and racial discrimination, none of which had resulted in significant consequences. Jenkins, though newer, had several recorded incidents of excessive force. The pattern was undeniable. Given the prominence of the victim and the overwhelming evidence of intent, the case moved rapidly into the prosecution phase. Both the District Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office, on behalf of the Department of Justice, filed comprehensive indictments. The charges were serious and many. Federal civil rights violations, conspiracy to extort under color of law, unlawful detention, abuse of official position, false statements, and obstruction of justice. The trials of Ray George and Mark Jenkins became a national sensation. The evidence was damning. Isabel Sterling's testimony, both as a victim and as one of the most respected figures in federal law enforcement, was devastating. The defense mounted only a half-hearted argument claiming systemic failures, citing stress, begging for leniency. But against the facts, the videos, the audio recordings, the admissions, and the damning personnel files, those defenses fell flat. It didn't take the jury long. Both George and Jenkins were found guilty on all major charges. Sentencing day, was a reckoning. The federal judge, stern and deliberate, delivered a harsh but resounding message. He spoke of the betrayal of public trust, the rot of racism, and the corruption of those meant to protect. He stressed that the punishment must match the gravity of the crime, not only for justice, but to set an example. His verdict, 15 years in federal prison for both men. A sentence as severe as it was necessary, reflecting the seriousness of their crimes, their intent, and the high-level status of their victim. Civil rights groups and justice advocates hailed the outcome as a major victory. For once, accountability had reached where it often didn't, into the ranks of those who wear the badge. Police departments across the country took notice. Many launched internal reviews of their training, accountability systems, and disciplinary procedures. The department that employed George and Jenkins underwent a complete overhaul, facing intense federal oversight and public scrutiny. For Deputy Director Isabel Sterling, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but not peace. The pain of what happened lingered, not just for herself, but for what it revealed about the society she served. Still, it strengthened her resolve. As she drove home that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the road, she didn't feel victorious. She felt purposeful. She would keep fighting for equality, for integrity, for a system where no one is above the law. Her message echoed loud and clear. Abuse of power and prejudice will be punished. Justice, though sometimes delayed, will always prevail. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you found this content meaningful, click like and subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful story. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another that matters.